HP Lion Tamer PT4. Transfiguration started with what was now the typical start of term speech regarding the AL exams. Harry listened to Professor McGonagall as she told them what they might expect during the exams, and what she planned for them this year. Finally she handed out snails for them to practice vanishing spells on. Harry, Ron and Hermione sat together. Ron had joined his two friends at breakfast, where he explained his change of heart. After Umbridge's class, I got really angry. Ron said between huge forkfuls on pancakes. All I could think of the rest of the day was how the whole world is against you, and I should be by your side. You're my friend Harry, and I wasn't being a very good one. I'm supposed to have your back, no matter what. Harry had truly appreciated the sentiment, and hoped that Ron would remember that as he explored his growing relationship with Daphne and Tracy. Harry was finding it more difficult to not think about the brunette. He knew why, of course. Thanks to Daphne's little sister, and Hermione, he now knew that Daphne fancied him, and that was the reason for her trying to befriend him. If Harry was honest, he did find her attractive. The problem was that he didn't know her, something that apparently Daphne herself had considered. She anted to take the time and get to know the real Harry, and that in itself spoke volumes to him. Harry couldn't really think of any good reason not to try things out with Daphne. Other than, of course, the threat of Voldemort, but every time he thought of that, he heard two voices chastising him for it, Sirius, and Dumbledore. You should not let anything stand in your way of happiness, Dumbledore would say. We're all on Voldemort's hit list, whether we associate with you or not, Sirius' voice would say. He'll want to kill us only because we oppose him, so stop being an imbecile. So, while he was trying to vanish his snail for Professor McGonagall, Harry decided that he should spend more time with Daphne Greengrass. He had nothing to lose and everything to gain, so what was the point in trying to keep her, or anyone else away? Very good, Mr. Potter. You've nearly got it, Professor McGonagall said, startling him back to reality. Harry saw that his snail was very nearly transparent, and was amazed to see that he'd nearly mastered the spell while thinking of Daphne. Give it another try, please. McGonagall had been sweeping through the class checking on their progress. She couldn't remember any time when Harry had grasped a spell so quickly, and thought he was quite close to having it perfected. Harry nodded, waved his wand and spoke the incantation, tapping the snail's shell, and smiled as the snail nearly disappeared. There was only the faintest traces of the invertebrate's shell still visible. He cancelled the spell so he could try again, but Professor McGonagall grabbed his hand. What is this? She asked, looking upset. Harry pulled his hand away and shook his head. Nothing, Professor. It's fine, really, Harry said softly. He was a bit angry at his head of house, as it was her that had all but forced him to go to his detentions. Professor McGonagall looked as if she wanted to press the issue, but Harry gave her a meaningful look, and she decided it was best to let the subject to drop. As she began walking away, she glanced back and saw Hermione giving a look of intense displeasure. Professor McGonagall made a mental note to speak with the headmaster on the matter as soon as possible. After lunch, Harry, Ron, and Hermione headed out to the grounds for the first Care of Magical Creatures class. They were joined in the entrance hall by the Slytherins, and Harry paused so Daphne and Tracy could catch up. Good afternoon. Daphne smiled. Good afternoon, Hermione responded. Hey. Harry smiled. None of them noticed the murderous looks being given to them by Draco and his pack of rabid wolves. The five of them gathered down by Hagrid's hut, where Professor Grubblyplank had set out a small table with what looked to be moving twigs crawling about. Professor Grubblyplank spread a handful of what appeared to be grains of rice on the table, which the moving twigs fell upon greedily. It turned out the creature were called bowtruckles, and the class was split into groups of 3, and were allowed to observe a bowtruckle between them. Harry partnered with Daphne and Tracy, while Hermione, Ron, and Neville picked out a tree guardian together. Ron looked rather upset that Harry had chosen to study with the 2 Slytherin girls. He wasn't the only one. Draco Malfoy looked ready to murder as he watched Harry and his housemates working together, occasionally laughing at the antics of the little creature. As Ron seemed more interested in what Harry was doing, Hermione was able to talk to Neville, who appeared very nervous. "He's kind of cute, don't you think?" she said, not really sure how to begin a conversation. Neville only nodded, avoiding her eyes altogether. Hermione silently cursed Ginny for blurting out Neville's secret. He was already incredibly shy, and now it was worse because she knew that he liked her. She asked Neville to hold the bowtruckle so she could sketch its face. Neville held up the creature, and Hermione took those few moments to really look at Neville. She noticed that he was starting to lose his baby fat. His face wasn't so rounded anymore, and he also looked as if he were gaining a bit of muscle. Hermione imagined the lugging heavy bags of fertilizer might be the cause of it. She also noticed how gently he handled the tiny creature in his hands. Hermione remembered listening to Ginny talk about the Yule Ball last year, and how well Neville had treated her that evening. How, even though he wasn't a great dancer, he'd not sat out unless she had wanted to. He'd been a great escort, and, Ginny admitted, that if she hadn't liked Harry so much, she would have tried to date Neville. But Hermione needed more than a decent dancer. She needed someone who could stimulate her mind as well as her hormones. The truth was, she knew Neville to be smart, though he had difficulty in remembering things. Hermione had a theory that Neville was something akin to a beaten dog. She had heard Neville talk about the way his grandmother would constantly compare him to his father. Hermione doubted anyone would have self-confidence if they were subjected to that all their life. "Could you take him now?" Neville asked, in a very soft voice. "I need to try and draw him." Hermione smiled and offered her hands to accept the little creature. As Neville placed the bowtruckle into Hermione's open hands, he brushed against her, which sent little shivers down her spine. Shaking her head, Hermione passed it off as her thinking about the 2 of them, and not something of significance. Still, the moment lingered in her brain the rest of class. Daphne could not remember a more fun and interesting care of magical creatures class. She, Tracy and Harry had a lot of fun passing the little twig-like critter between them, offering it wood lice to eat. It seemed the bowtruckle liked Harry the most, and seemed to want to stay near him, which made it difficult for Harry to sketch the creature. "You'd better check your pockets when you leave to make sure he doesn't try and hitch a ride with you, Harry." Daphne smiled. When Harry smiled back at her, a real, relaxed smile, she felt her stomach roll over. His eyes shone brilliantly in the late morning sunshine, and it made her brain get a bit fuzzy. "We heard you met Astoria yesterday." Tracy grinned, which made Daphne glare at her. "Yeah, she's a forward." Harry smiled. "She's also nosy and annoying." Daphne huffed. "Nah, she's all right." Harry chuckled. "You don't live with her." "She's got a point." Tracy smiled, trying to take the bowtruckle, which had dug its sharp little claws into Harry's cloak. The 3 of them had to work together to gently release the fidgeting little creature. "I'm sorry for whatever she said to you. She thinks things are very simple and can be solved easily. She doesn't really understand sometimes." "It's no problem. It's not the worst thing to ever happen to me." "There he goes again." Tracy grinned as the little bowtruckle leapt from her hands and scurried up Harry's sleeve to sit on his shoulder. "You're being quite difficult." Daphne scolded the bowtruckle, which gave a sharp chirp. The three laughed at the creature. Guess he told you. Tracy laughed. Father was talking to the minister not long before we got back, they heard Draco suddenly say from next to them. Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle had apparently moved closer to Harry and the girls. The ministry really wants to crack down on substandard teaching around here. It's probably why that great oaf isn't here anymore. He likely got handed his walking papers. About time if you ask me. First that crazed hippogriff, then those whatever they were last year. You didn't want a blast-ended scrote as a pet, Malfoy. I thought for sure you would have tried to smuggle one home. You know how they say pets resemble their owners. Harry remarked without turning to look at Malfoy, who raised his head, staring coldly at Harry. He might have been worried his mother would confuse the two of them. Tracy said, which made Daphne and Harry laugh out loud. Draco's face colored and his eyes narrowed at Tracy. You should be careful, Davis. I won't put up with your cheek. I can. Yeah, tell Daddy, we know. Merlin, we've heard it so often, I can almost repeat your speech word for word. Draco, as a fellow Slytherin, no one cares. It's pathetic. Pathetic, is it? Draco's voice rose, and every head rose to see what was happening. Before Draco could utter another word, however, Professor Grubblyplank came over and suggested they all get back to work. Harry and his new friends kept casting glances to obviously incensed Malfoy, and chuckling lightly. When class ended, Harry and the girls were joined by Ron and Hermione as they all started heading back towards the castle. Would you all like to join us in the library after dinner? Daphne asked, a bit hopefully. We can all work on homework together. Sure. Hermione smiled, but Harry frowned. I have detention the rest of the week. Maybe this weekend, as I'm sure I'll be quite backed up on my work. What is she making you do? Daphne asked. She saw Hermione frown, but Harry just shrugged and made a noise of indifference. Lines. That's not so bad. Tracy said, her voice somewhat chipper. Daphne watched Hermione's frown deepen, but refrained from commenting. She knew the bushy-haired bookworm wanted to say something, and Daphne suspected that it wasn't going to be pleasant. She made a mental note to bring the topic up later. What about you, Weasley? Will you be joining us? Daphne asked, not really sure why she was extending the offer. Ron had been very open about how he felt about her and Tracy. Still, she felt the need to make the effort. She truly did not want to come between Harry and his friend, and hoped that Ron might at least learn to accept her. Ron only shrugged, and Daphne felt it was better than she could hope for at this juncture. They said goodbye, as the three Gryffindors had to get to the greenhouses for herbology, while Daphne and Tracy and the rest of the Slytherins made their way to Charms. Did you see Hermione's face when I asked about Harry's detention? Daphne asked. No. Why? She looked like she had just swallowed stink sap or something. Something's going on. Like what? I don't know, but I intend to find out tonight. Well, I'm impressed with how things went today. I never suspected he would have asked us to be his partners. I thought Weasley was going to bust a vein or something. I don't even know if he got any work done with as much as he was staring at Harry. I really wonder what his problem is. I can understand his dislike of Malfoy, but he doesn't even know us. He acts like we're going to tear Harry's heart out and feed on it. I don't think that's really the organ you have in mind. Tracy smirked. Oh my gods. Daphne shrieked, looking horror-struck. Could you be any more crass? Possibly. After dinner that evening, the trio broke up, each heading off for different destinations. Harry grumbled as he went off to Professor Umbridge's office. He'd been asked by Angelina Johnson, the new captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team, about trying to get Friday evening off so he could attend the Quidditch tryouts. Harry was more than a little sure that would not fly, but he had promised to try. Hermione was going to meet the Slytherin girls in the library, while Ron was going to who knew where to do who knew what, though Hermione was sure that it would not involve homework. She was seriously considering not allowing him access to her notes, or helping him with any of his work, hoping to teach him a lesson. Hermione found her favorite table empty, and set her bag upon it, before disappearing into the stacks to find the books she would need to complete her work. She had finished her potions essay the night before, but had intended of double-checking some facts. There was also her rune translations, and that very pathetic set of questions assigned by Umbridge. When she returned to her table she found that both Daphne and Tracy had arrived, and were just getting out their own work. "Just couldn't wait for us, eh, Hermione?" Daphne smiled. Hermione could only shrug, but she smiled all the same. "I'm not big on procrastination," she said, and the other two just shook their heads. Daphne took a moment to check out the books Hermione had collected, and sighed heavily. "I'll be back in a moment," she said, getting up from the table and disappearing around a corner. "Good, she's gone." Tracy grinned. "Has Harry talked about her at all?" Hermione sighed, and shook her head. "Only when he's defending his friendship with her. He knows she likes him now, thanks to Astoria, and me, but I'm not sure how he feels about it at the moment." "Damn," Tracy said. Hermione looked up from her book, looking curious. "Do you know why she likes him?" "Who can say?" Tracy shrugged. "I do know that she'd do right by him. It's just in her nature to be loyal to the people she cares for. And she'd be a lot better for him than half those slags who lust after him." "That's true," Hermione agreed. "The thing is, she's so determined to take things slow with him, like she's only got one shot to do things right. I don't know. Maybe if they could actually spend some real time alone together that would make things go faster." "Maybe," Hermione said. "I've known him for years, and I still don't know everything there is to know about him." "Okay," Daphne said as she returned to the table with the book she needed for her potions essay. She opened the book and flipped a few pages until she found what she was looking for. Opening her ink bottle and dipping her quill, she began writing some notes. "Hermione," Daphne said softly, hoping to sound nonplussed. "What happened during Harry's detention?" There was silence, and Daphne looked up to see Hermione sitting as if frozen. Her quill was over her parchment and her hand was trembling fro anger. That horrid woman," Hermione said between clenched teeth. "She made him she." "What?" both Daphne and Tracy asked together, both leaning towards the bushy-haired girl. "She made him cut into his own hand. He had to write lines in his own blood," Hermione hissed angrily, her face turning red with her rage. "What are you talking about?" Tracy asked. "Hermione, calm down and tell us what you know," Daphne urged. Hermione took several minutes to calm down. She took great gulps of air and let them slowly. Finally, after her color returned to normal, she was able to tell them everything she had learned. "He came back with words scratched into the back of his hand. When I pressed him, he admitted that she had made him use a strange quill that wrote in his own blood and cut up the back of his head." "A blood quill?" Daphne looked horrified. "That's illegal. Why didn't he tell someone?" "He tried," Hermione replied. "He grabbed the quill and started heading towards McGonagall's office when she put him in a body-bind curse. She told him that he could do the detention or she could expel him. She told him she had the entire ministry behind her and he could do nothing. Both Daphne and Tracy looked as angry as Hermione felt now. That absolute hag. Daphne snarled. Blood quills are illegal, what is she even doing with one? Why are we sitting here? Tracy asked. We should tell someone. We can't, Hermione said. First, I promised I wouldn't say anything. I shouldn't have even told you. But secondly, if we tell, she'll know Harry said something, and then who knows what she'll do. She's here because of the Minister of Magic, and he's determined to shut Harry up. I'm almost certain that those Dementors were sent to his home just so he would do magic, and they could get rid of him. Daphne now looked pale. I could write my father, maybe he could help us somehow. At the least he might be able to get someone in here to investigate her. But she's working for Fudge. He'd give her a warning, and she could hide it, and then it would be Harry's word against hers, and after everything they said about him in the papers this summer. He doesn't have a leg to stand on. Tracy said bitterly. There has to be something we can do. Daphne pounded her fist. All I can think of is to get him to control his temper. She's going to be ruthless on him this year, doing everything she can to provoke him. Hermione suggested. I bet she wants to pin Cedric Diggory's death on Harry, and then throw him in Azkaban without trial. We thought the same thing. Tracy said. So how do we get him to control his temper? By giving him a distraction. Hermione smiled at Daphne, who suddenly blushed. What do you mean? Daphne asked suspiciously. I mean that if Harry's mind is focused on something else, or rather someone else, maybe he won't rise to her challenges. Hermione grinned. I think I understand. Tracy smirked, looking at Daphne as well. Whoa. Daphne said, holding up her hands defensively. We barely know each other. It's too early to even think about snogging. Tracy asked helpfully. I didn't, that's not what I... Daphne stuttered, but Hermione simply looked pleased. Look, I'm only suggesting getting you two together to spend some time alone, and get to know each other. What happens then is completely up to you. I just think it might be good for Harry if he could keep his head down and his mouth shut. Hermione smiled lightly. Unless he's kissing you, of course. Tracy grinned at Daphne, who slammed her head on the table. Tracy and Hermione giggly softly on either side of her. I tell you, Albus, there was no mistaking it. She's forcing him to use a blood quill. Professor McGonagall said firmly. She had come to his office as soon as curfew went into effect. She knew of course that there would of course be one or two students who ventured out, but it was likely they'd be sniffed out by Filch and his filthy feline. She had sat on her discovery all day, knowing that she had to wait to speak to the headmaster about what the new defense teacher was making Harry Potter endure. When she arrived, she found that the headmaster was not alone, as Severus Snape was also there. The trouble will be in proving the matter. Dumbledore sighed wearily. Harry's word will not be enough, and I sincerely doubt we will be able to get our hands on the quill. Something must be done, this cannot stand. McGonagall said indignantly. Our hands on this matter are tied. Dumbledore confessed. Surely the minister has taken steps to assure his spy's success. He has already tried once to have Harry expelled. He do not think he will fail a second time. She asked me to brew Veritaserum. Snape said coolly. Whatever for? McGonagall asked gobsmacked. I would theorize that she will wish to question the staff about me. It's likely that she'll invite you to join her for tea, and then deliver a dosage to you. As a ministry official, anything she is able to get out of you would of course be admissible in court. I already understand that the school governors have been leaned on for my removal. They can't let you go, McGonagall said, her hand flying to her mouth in horror. And so far they have not, but the more threatened Cornelius feels, the more he will push. I believe that we have only seen a little of what is to come. If my sources are correct, there will be some very interesting changes made here at Hogwarts. Dumbledore sighed, steepling his fingers as he looked at his two teachers. McGonagall sat down heavily. Is there no way to help the boy? I am afraid that at the moment, there is none. However, I think that he may find help through his friends. If what I hear is true, young Harry is expanding his circle of friends. I don't see how that will help him, McGonagall said. My dear Minerva, I believe that Harry may find new strength and wisdom as he opens his life to new people, and this school may very well be able to stand united. I think you're reading too much into it all, Albus, Snape remarked curtly, but the headmaster was unfazed by the potions master's sour outlook. Instead he simply smiled up at the greasy-haired man and shrugged. Harry's hand throbbed as he climbed the stairs after his detention. By the end of it, his hand had been bleeding. He had cringed when she had taken his hand in her stubby fingers to examine it. He had been correct in his assumption that she would not let him out of his detention for the Quidditch tryouts on Friday. She had laughed at him, and told him that he was being punished, and that maybe missing out on something he wanted to do would help to teach him the lesson she wished to teach him. He'd spent another exhausting 4 hours in her company cutting into the back of his hand with that wretched implement of torture. He had managed to keep quiet all throughout his time with Umbridge, but now his jaw really hurt from clenching it for so long. And he was tired. He felt drained somehow. It really took a lot out of him to sit there mutilating himself and trying to appear as if it didn't bother him at all. He was just starting to imagine 1,000 different ways the Toad could meet her demise when he reached the portrait hole, and saw to his surprise Ron. Ron turned around, looking as if he'd just been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Oh, hey Harry, what are you doing out here? Just finished detention, you. Oh, I was, Why do you have your broom? Were you out flying? Harry asked. Ron seemed to slump, and he looked dejected. I was practicing. I thought I might try out for the Quidditch team now that I've got a decent broom. Are you any good? Harry asked brightly. I'm all right. Fred and George always made me keep for them at home. I wish I could be there to see you try out. Harry sighed. Umbridge didn't let you off. Nope. I'm being punished. Harry grimaced. He gave the password and he and Ron entered the common room. They saw Hermione on the sofa with Neville and were about to join her when Harry saw the almost imperceptible shake of her head. Harry quickly took Ron's arm and led him up to the dorms. What's going on? Why didn't we go see Hermione? Ron asked in bewilderment. She was busy. Harry tried lamely. She was only talking to Neville. Ron said oblivious. Just let it drop, mate. For Hermione's sake. Harry pressed, and Ron stared blankly for a few moments before shrugging and getting changed for bed. Harry watched him, wondering what Ron's reaction would be to learning Neville fancied Hermione. Harry had his suspicions that Ron had feelings for Hermione as well, but knew that Hermione did not share those feelings. She'd even confessed that were it not for Harry, she thought it unlikely the two would have become friends at all. This train of thought led Harry to begin thinking how Ron would react to Harry dating Daphne. He'd been less than civil to her that day, but Ron had not started fling accusations at her, which Harry felt was an improvement. He'd even noted that Daphne had tried to include Ron in her study group. So far as Harry could tell, Ron was the only one who seemed to be against Harry and Daphne. Even the twins, who were generally anti-Slytherin, had perked up at Daphne's name. Well, there had been that weird incident with Ginny, but Harry hadn't given it much thought. Harry just wished he could spend some time with her. It was one thing to speak during class or as they passed in the halls, but he would never get to know her if that was all they did. He knew that she liked him. Hermione had been good enough to point it out, and Daphne's sister had nearly shouted it across the Great Hall yesterday. The problem was he wasn't sure how he felt about her. Sure, she was pretty, and very smart, but other than that. Ron began snoring in the bed next to Harry's, and he decided to try and get some sleep. His homework was piling up, and he knew he had to do something about it before it got worse. Perhaps he would skip breakfast and try and make a dent in it. Maybe lunch as well. "Miss Granger, will you stay behind a moment?" Professor McGonagall called as her students were all heading off to their next class. Hermione, looking a little surprised, heft her bag onto her shoulder and made her way towards McGonagall's desk. The usually stern professor waited until the class was empty, and with a flick of her wand, shut the door. She sat behind her desk and sighed. "Miss Granger, I know what is happening to Mr. Potter. I know what Professor Umbridge is doing to him." It was as if a great weight was taken from Hermione's shoulders, and she felt her legs weaken a bit. She smiled, and before she could stop herself, she began speaking very fast. "Oh, thank God, Professor. He made me promise not to say anything, and I've been so worried about him. Whenever he gets back from detention he looks so horrible, and his hand—" "Miss Granger." Professor McGonagall held up a hand to stop the girl's ramblings. "I am aware of the issue, but I cannot do anything about it. I've spoken to the headmaster, and it was discussed." "What?" Hermione looked gobsmacked. "You discussed it? Why aren't you throwing her out on her fat arse?" "Miss Granger." Hermione suddenly looked embarrassed. She normally chastised people for using foul language, but she had lost herself to her indignation at the moment. "Professor, she's torturing him. Why can't you do anything?" "I understand your feelings, I honestly do. I argued with the headmaster about the problem. However, it was felt that, at this moment, it is best to let the matter go. It appears that the ministry has all the cards, and should we try to fight the matter, Harry will be expelled." Hermione sighed heavily, suddenly filled with a desire to find Umbridge and punch in her wide toad-like mouth. "What about the cuts on his hand, Professor? Surely that could show that Mr. Potter is mutilating himself?" McGonagall asked. She had brought up these arguments to the headmaster just the previous evening. "Even if we managed to get our hands on the quill, it could be said that it was planted, or that whoever found the quill had actually planted it to set up Professor Umbridge." "What about Veritaserum?" Hermione asked hopefully. "Think, Miss Granger. The ministry is trying to silence Mr. Potter. Do you really think they would allow the use of truth potion in a matter that would make them look bad? They will throw him into prison without a trial. Just like Sirius." Hermione barely whispered, anger gripping her. "Exactly." Hermione stared pleadingly at her head of house. "Is there nothing that can be done?" Professor McGonagall gave a rather weak smile and opened her desk drawer. She handed over a large vial of a sickly yellow fluid to her. The girl. Murtlap, she said. It should ease the pain, and help the cuts to heal. It would be good not to mention where you got it. Should you need more, come see me privately. Hermione nodded, slipping the vial into her bag, and giving a grim smile of gratitude to her favorite teacher, before heading off. As Hermione shut the door to McGonagall's classroom, she couldn't help feeling as if the teachers she so respected and looked up to had failed her. They were going to allow Harry to continue to be tortured. While she truly did understand the precarious nature of their situation, Hermione thought that perhaps the teachers hadn't really tried to resolve the situation. Maybe they needed help from the outside. Someone who wasn't under the threat of the Ministry. Daphne, Hermione whispered and raced down to the Great Hall. The first week came to a close at last, and Harry felt an immense sense of relief as he climbed the stairs to the Gryffindor common room after his last detention with Umbridge. His hand was bleeding quite freely, and Harry had wrapped a handkerchief around it as soon as he was outside Umbridge's office. As Harry made his way back to his dorm, all he could think of was how far behind in his studies he was getting. He had missed several meals during the week trying to catch up, but his teachers seemed relentless in making the workload heavier. However, Harry knew he could get it all finished over the weekend, and vowed to do his best to stay out of trouble so this never happened again. He had missed the Quidditch tryouts that evening, and wondered who the new keeper would be. He knew that Ron was trying out, and hoped his friend made it. Harry thought maybe they could manage to heal their friendship through the game they both loved so much. When Harry reached the fourth floor, his mind wandered off of the subjects of homework and Quidditch, as Harry thought back, with a smile, to the second visit from Daphne's sister, Astoria. He'd gotten at lunch earlier that day. Harry was a little frightened of this rather spunky 12-year-old. However, his friends seemed to think she was very entertaining. Once again, she had strode right up to him, her light brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail, her eyes bright and determined. "So, it's been a week," she said firmly at Harry. He had glanced at Hermione, who had suddenly focused on her newspaper. Harry saw both Ron and Neville, who had started sitting with them during the week, look up in interest. Harry could only nod at Astoria, who folded her arms looking rather cross now. "So, why aren't you two sitting together or something?" "Huh?" Harry asked, again looking to Hermione for help. His bushy-haired friend was still not looking up, although she did appear to be shaking, which slightly upset Harry. "Are you laughing at me?" Harry asked her. Hermione quickly shook her head, but still would not look up. "Have you even talked to Daphne at all?" Astoria said, sitting on the bench next to Harry. "Yes. She was my partner for care of magical creatures yesterday." "Did you ask her anything about herself? Did you learn anything about my sister?" Astoria asked, looking rather upset at his apparent idiocy. "You don't understand. These things are well." Harry tried, but Astoria cut him off. "What's to understand?" Astoria threw his hands up, nearly smacking Harry. "If you like her, be with her. It's pretty simple. I don't get why you have to make it complicated." "Is it because she's in Slytherin?" Harry shook his head. "Is it because she's a pure blood?" Astoria pressed. "No." Harry shook his head. "I don't care about blood purity. I just don't know her that well." We haven't spent enough time together for me to really. He tried, but Astoria was unfazed. Okay, look. She likes to read. Not like school books, but like poetry and junk. Astoria stared at Harry as if she were revealing the deepest secrets of magic. She sings in the shower and she loves orchids. There, now you know her. Stop being so obtuse. She likes you, there really isn't much more that you need to know. With that, Astoria gave a large grin, hopped off the bench and skipped away. Okay, what the hell just happened? Harry asked, turning back to his friends. He didn't miss the look of disgust on Ron's face, and he felt himself getting a bit angry. Ron had been able to keep his mouth shut when the topic of Daphne was brought up, but this might prove to be too much for the somewhat volatile redhead. Harry quickly looked away from Ron to Hermione, who was only now looking up from her newspaper, her face red and tears streaming from her eyes. You were laughing, Harry said, pointing his finger accusingly at Hermione, who finally lost the battle and guffawed heartily. Her laughter was contagious, and both Harry and Neville began chuckling along with her. Ron, however, stabbed at his chicken bitterly, watching the second-year Slytherin walking away. The rest of the day, Ron had barely spoken to him, and Harry was sure he was doing his best not to mention Astoria or give some dire warning against befriending Slytherins. It was actually a bit of a relief when they parted ways after dinner, as the tension between himself and Ron was becoming nearly suffocating. During his detention, Harry had at last been able to think on what Astoria had said. It actually worked to distract him from the now excruciating pain in his hand as he wrote his lines. Could it really be as simple as the young girl claimed it to be? If you like someone, to just be with them. Was he even sure he liked Daphne? We haven't even had a real conversation that didn't involve class, really. Okay, on the train, but not since then. What if she doesn't like me like she thinks she does? Harry had pondered these questions throughout his detention, and was surprised when Umbridge had finally dismissed him. Mimbulus Mimbletonia, Harry said as he reached the portrait hole. The fat lady moved aside, allowing him to enter the common room. There was quite a few people still up, including the members of his team. Harry's back. Fred called out. How are you, mate? George said, clapping Harry on the back. Like to introduce our new keeper. Cormac McLagan said, the boy sitting between Katie Bell and Alicia Spinnet. He was quite tall, and broad in the chest, with a head of dark blonde curls. He offered a hand, which Harry shook, feeling a bit intimidated. Cormac's hand was quite large and very muscular. Cormac was just regaling us with his vast Quidditch knowledge, and pointing out areas we might improve our game. Fred said cheerfully, but he rolled his eyes as he spoke. I see. Well, I look forward to seeing you on the field. Excuse me, I really should try to catch up on some homework. The team all waved, and Harry began heading to the dorms, when Hermione, who'd been sitting in a chair near the stairs, stopped him and pulled him aside. She handed him a large vial and smiled. Soak your hand in this. It will help. She smiled. What is it? Harry asked. Essence of Murtlap. You should talk to Ron, he's rather depressed. He really did horribly out there. You saw? Hermione nodded. I went with Neville, Daphne, and Tracy. We wanted to support him. Oh, Harry, he just sort of fell apart out there. Oh, Merlin. Harry sighed. Listen, I'm sorry to ask, but would you? Right after breakfast, we'll go to the library. I'm sure we can get you caught up by dinner tomorrow. Then, you'll have Sunday, at least. Harry smiled gratefully at his friend and hugged her warmly. This surprised Hermione, as she simply couldn't remember Harry ever initiating a hug. She tried to dismiss it, and watched him head up to the dorms, before returning to her seat, where Neville was sitting quietly. I'm very sorry, Neville, what were you saying before? No need to apologize. He needs all the support he can get right now. Neville said softly. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Hermione shrugged. Why aren't you trying to go out with Harry? Even in the dim light of the common room, Hermione could see Neville blushing. She smiled softly, and reached to take his hand, trying hard not to shiver at its warmth. I love Harry, but not in that way. He's the brother I never had, and he feels the same way about me. We actually talked about it a few days ago. While I care very deeply for him, I just don't have those kind of feelings for him. Besides, I think I'm starting to like someone else. Neville smiled shyly at this and nodded. I just wondered. Hey, Ron. Harry said as he entered the dorm. Ron was lying on his bed, staring up at the canopy, his face a mask of grim resolve. He didn't even turn to look at Harry as he sat down. Harry could not remember Ron looking so thoroughly depressed in all the time they'd been friends. I heard about tryouts. I'm sorry. Harry tried, but Ron said nothing. The redhead simply kept his eyes locked on the canopy of his four-poster bed. Harry changed into his pajamas, and then conjured a bowl so he could soak his hand in the strange yellow liquid Hermione had given him. As soon as he put his hand in the rather sticky yellow fluid, he felt the burning pain dissolve. Harry couldn't help but sigh as the relief washed over him. He opened his eyes and saw that Ron was now looking at him. What's that? He asked, sounding hoarse. His eyes were red, and Harry wondered if he'd been crying at some point. Essence of Murtlap. Hermione gave it to me. Where'd she get it? Ron asked, rising up. Harry shrugged, and Ron shot out of his bed, as if he'd been burned. He slapped the bowl off Harry's bedside table, sending Murtlap everywhere. Oi, why'd you do that? Harry asked angrily. Ron looked back to Harry with concern. She got it from those Slytherins. They're trying to poison you. I saw them up in the stands together. I couldn't concentrate on tryouts because I was concerned for Hermione. Not this again. Harry groaned. I've tried to keep my silence this week, but enough is enough, Harry. You have got to stay away from those girls. Ron, I know you're angry because of the tryouts, but you can't put the blame on anyone but yourself. You just weren't good enough this year. Maybe if you work at it the rest of the year, you'll make the team next year. But you can't say you didn't make the team because Daphne was there. She went to support you. How do you know? You weren't even there. Because Hermione told me, and I trust Hermione. Harry shouted. You trust Hermione? The same Hermione who gave you that whatever it was. You mean the stuff that was helping my cuts? Harry asked, holding up his hand to show the still bleeding wounds he'd endured during his detention. I warned you, Ron. I warned you that if you kept acting like this it might destroy our friendship. Ron looked as if he'd just been slapped, and his mouth started to open and close, giving him a rather fish-like appearance. Seriously, mate. Did you not learn anything about trusting me after what happened last year? It's like you're repeating all your mistakes all over again. Only this time, it's worse. I'm sorry, Ron, but I don't want to keep arguing over this. Until I see some sign that Daphne is actually something sinister, I'm going to trust my gut. And my gut tells me she's okay. I can't believe this. Ron shouted indignantly. You're ending our friendship over a girl? A Slytherin girl? No, Ron. Harry said sadly. You are. With that, Harry climbed into his bed, closing the curtains around him. Harry settled into his pillow, and heard Ron stomp out of the dorm, slamming the door behind him. Harry felt horrible for what he'd said, but he knew that Ron was wrong, he just knew it. He wasn't even remotely sure of what he felt for Daphne, and he knew that he loved Ron like a brother, but things were getting out of hand. If their friendship was going to endure, Ron truly needed to stop being so prejudiced. Harry awoke early the next morning, but he didn't get out of bed right away. Instead he reflected on his week, and wondered what Sirius would think of it all. Would he have any advice to give, other than to keep his nose clean, which Harry couldn't help chuckle at, considering that his godfather was a founding member of the Marauders. Still, he felt he needed to unburden himself. Harry threw off his blankets and was greeted by soft sunlight. Harry glanced out the window, and felt a sense of wonder as he could see the sun just beginning to creep over the distant mountains. Harry showered, dressed, and then rummaged into his school bag for quill and parchment, before heading to the common room. Taking a seat by the fireplace, Harry began to write to his godfather. Padfoot. The first week back has been nothing short of hell. Our new defense teacher and I don't see eye to eye on more than a few topics, and I've already had detention with her. She a little less pleasant than your mother. Ron and I are also not getting along too well. I don't think he likes my choice in company. I'm trying to follow your advice, and I've tried talking to Daphne. She's very nice, and I've enjoyed the little time we've spent together, and am hoping to see her a bit more. Hogwarts feels empty, as if someone great is missing, you know? I hope that you're okay, and I miss you. Hope to hear from you soon. Harry. Harry reread his letter just to make sure that he hadn't put anything important in it. Folded it, and then headed for the Oli. Harry was amazed at how ominous the quiet was in the castle at this early hour. He'd been out late at night, but so intent was he on whatever it was that he was doing, he had never really noticed how peaceful the castle was without a couple thousand students about. Harry reached the Oli and called for Hedwig, who glided down easily, hooting softly as she landed on his arm. Hello, girl. Harry smiled, stroking her feathers. Hedwig's bright amber eyes seemed to grow heavy, and Harry was reminded of Crookshanks when he got his ears scratched. Harry thought it would have been terribly funny if Hedwig could purr. I have a letter for Sirius, are you up for a flight? Harry asked gently. Hedwig's eyes opened wide, and her chest puffed out. Harry knew she was ready, and tied his letter to his leg, before taking her to the window. With a quick nip to his finger, Hedwig spread her wings and took to the air. Harry stood at the window, watching his faithful owl soar into the horizon, until she was little more than a speck, hardly distinguishable in the sky. Harry began heading back towards the castle when he ran into someone. "Oh, hi, Harry," smiled Cho Chang. "Hi, Cho," Harry said a bit nervously. "What are you doing up so early?" "I woke up this morning and I remembered it was my mother's birthday. I got up here as quick as I could so she would get her gift off," Cho said softly as she selected an owl and tied the parcel to the bird's outstretched leg. "Oh, that's nice. Well, I should." "Harry," Cho said, finishing tying her package to the patient owl, "I haven't really had a chance to talk to you this week. How are you doing?" Her eyes were searching his, and Harry felt his chest tighten. "All right, I suppose." Harry shoved his hand into his pocket so Cho wouldn't see the cuts on it. "I've heard that you and Umbridge aren't getting along." "That's putting it gently." Harry chuckled. He thought she looked incredible in the soft morning light coming in through the Oloy window. He noticed that she wasn't taller than him any longer. "She is a bit off-putting." Cho smiled at him, and Harry nodded. "So has Gryffindor gotten a new keeper yet?" "Oh," Harry said, clearing the cobwebs that seemed to be forming in his mind as he stared at Cho. "Yeah, a Corman, something or rather. I met him last night." "Is he any good?" Cho asked, looking over her shoulder at him as she was now taking the owl to the window so it could take flight. She was staring at him through her curtain of silky black hair, and Harry felt his knees get weak. "I didn't see. I was in detention," Harry said, his voice hardly audible. "With Umbridge?" Cho asked, knowing full well that's who Harry had been serving his detentions. The entire school had been abuzz with the story of how Harry had called the new teacher a liar. "What is she making you do?" "Lines," Harry said, a shadow crossing his face as he felt his hand sting. "It's very brave of you to stand up to her, you know," Cho said, turning to face him. Harry saw something in her eye now, something that made him wary. "All you did was tell the truth about what happened to how he..." Cho's voice seemed to fail her, and she turned away from him, taking a few deep breaths. Harry wondered what he should say, or do. He'd no real experience at giving comfort. Did he mention me?" Cho's voice was soft, barely a whisper. Harry felt suddenly hollow. He should have guessed that she'd want to know about Cedric. After all, they had been dating last year. "No. I'm sorry," he said miserably. Cho's head nodded. She seemed to regain her composure and turned around again. "I'm sorry, it's just that, well, you were the last one to see him alive, and I've wondered." Harry held up his hand, stopping her. "He didn't suffer. It was quick, just as it always is when Voldemort kills someone." Harry heard her hiccup at the name of the Dark Lord, and felt his opinion of her drop a bit. He supposed he should just accept how pathetic it was that everyone cowered like beaten dogs at the name of the evil wizard. But how were they supposed to fight against him if this was how they reacted to the merest mention of Lord Voldemort? "Well," Harry said, taking a step towards the door, "I really should." It happened so fast, Harry had trouble processing what was happening. He had looked up at Cho to say goodbye when she'd suddenly lunged at him. She had thrown her arms around his neck and pressed her lips to his. Harry had fantasized about kissing Cho Chang for over a year. In his mind's eye it was always soft. It was always warm and intense. This was nothing like what he'd thought it would be. She was hard, and forceful. Her lips were tight and pressed so hard against his, that he was sure he'd split his lips on his teeth. On top of that, he wasn't even given a chance to respond. Just when his brain caught up to the situation, and his hands were rising to hold her close to him, Cho released him, and ran out of the Oli. Harry slumped against the wall, next to the door, rubbing his now sore lips, wondering if all kissing was like that. If so, he wasn't quite sure he liked it, and thought that both Dean and Seamus, who Harry had heard discussing the activity many times, were quite insane. What was even more curious to Harry was that he had felt nothing when Cho had kissed him. Harry had overheard loads of people talking about feeling a spark, or electricity, or fireworks, or something when they kissed someone. All Harry had felt was pain, and a bit of sympathy for the girl, nothing more. Was he heartless? Was he unable to feel anything good? Had everything he'd heard been rubbish? Slowly, Harry steadied himself, straightened his cloak and began making his way to the Great Hall for breakfast. He felt he needed to ask someone about the issue. With each step, Harry cursed the fact that he'd already sent off his letter to his godfather. She would. Hermione looked rather astonished. Kissed me. Or at least I think that's what she did. It was very hard and painful. Harry said, looking to the Ravenclaw table where Cho sat with her curly-haired friend. I always kind of thought it would be nicer. I didn't feel anything. Did I do it wrong? Having not witnessed it, I can only guess. Hermione smiled softly at her friend. But I'm going to say no. I'm guessing she was trying to see if she felt anything for you. How do you mean? Harry, she's a mess right now. It's obvious that she feels something for you, but she's still trying to get over what happened to Cedric. But why didn't I feel anything for her when we kissed? Harry looked worried. Is there something wrong with me? I thought I liked her. I mean, Harry. Hermione smiled, patting his hand from across the table. You had a crush on her. You found her attractive, but what did you know about her, other than she was good at Quidditch? Harry could only shrug. I'm sure she's nice, but I don't think you two were meant to be together. How do you know? Harry asked skeptically. You wouldn't be asking me all of this if you were. Try not to worry about it, Harry. Hermione smiled encouragingly at her friend. Just because you didn't feel anything with Cho, doesn't mean you won't when you kiss someone else. Harry couldn't help but look over at the Slytherin table where Daphne Greengrass sat with Tracy Davis. A small smile formed on his face, and he nodded to Hermione, who was smiling knowingly. You'd better eat up. Hermione said. You've got a lot of work to catch up on. Please like and subscribe.